Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. Today I'm here with Anya Kamenetz, who's the education correspondent for NPR and the author of The Stolen Year, How COVID Changed Children's Lives and Where We Go Now. Can you hold up the book, Anya? You know what? It's backwards. It's so hard to hold it.
Oh,
Yeah, isn't that funny?
yeah.
This platform does a mirror image. So
Hmm.
anyway, we have a few copies of that book to give away. So if you want to be considered, Jessica's going to put the email in the chat for you to email, and we will put you into that raffle. Anya, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Sue.
Okay, so we're starting. The whole conversation is about how are we doing after COVID, and in our lifetime, it just feels like one of the biggest things we've ever encountered. Are there other times where, and we're going to talk a little bit about schools right now and the fact that kids lost so much with the school closings. So is there anything to look at prior where we can say this is what happened when all the schools closed?
So one of the reasons I kind of knew that school closures were going to be a huge deal from the very beginning is that as a young reporter, I was from New Orleans and I reported in the aftermath of Katrina, and I talked to kids that were, displaced from their homes. Schools in that city did not reopen for several months after the storm. And so kids were really kind of left to their own devices. Many enrolled in schools elsewhere. But that gap of learning actually caused more than 2 years of achievement losses. So it took 2 years for kids to really catch up to where they'd been just from that interruption, plus everything that came with it, right? All the social dislocation, all of the trauma, all of the economic disruption, which obviously is a very good parallel, I think, to the pandemic, just on a smaller scale.
So how long were schools closed in New Orleans?
Schools in New Orleans were closed for several months. They were closed for basically the fall semester.
So we're talking a comparison of like a year and a half for many people, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. It's just it's a blow up. It's a much, much bigger deal. Yeah.
That's interesting. So did you have a feeling when this started that we were making a mistake not leaving schools open based on what you learned about Katrina?
I knew that we would have really significant problems to deal with if schools stayed closed, even for a few weeks. And remember, we were talking about 2 weeks to flatten the curve at that point. I don't think I could have imagined that there would be, up to half of U.S. students that were out of school for more than a year. That's really was beyond the limits of what I could imagine in my worst case scenario. When I saw schools opening up in Europe, starting in the spring of 2020, I was like, why are we not doing this here? I mean, this is really going sideways. This is going bad in a really complicated way.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess hindsight is, you had hindsight from another experience, but for all of us, like hindsight's 2020. For researching your book, you followed real families, and you saw the toll it took on them to have their kids home during COVID. So for the middle school and high school stories, what surprised you the most?
So I think what's interesting, I mean, for teenagers, and this also actually was forecast in the data, but I mean, teenagers crave their peers, they crave status, accomplishment, challenge, risk, and so many other things that they can't get outside of their, inside their house, essentially. And for middle school students, it's this time of identity formation, right? Your peers are so important to you and figuring out where you fit in. And that's something else that they were really deprived of. For teenagers, I think one thing that was interesting was that a lot of them, even when schools were closed, they were still able to go out and work at essential jobs. And so I had a family of 5 that I followed, and the oldest kid had a job at Sonic. And he basically was like, well, school is online. I'm just going to spend more time at Sonic. And he got promoted to assistant manager. He's working there almost full time, and eventually his school, his grades went in the toilet because I've got another thing that I'm actually doing where I can be around people. I can have a sense of purpose. And that really drew him out of the academic track in a way that was, pretty detrimental.
It's so interesting. I mean, the good side is he earned some money and he found a way to survive. Yeah. Bad news is school became like not a priority.
Well, and you contrast that to his brother, who was the middle child of the family and didn't have school And unlike his younger sisters, didn't have gymnastics, which it was Oklahoma, so they stayed open pretty much the entire time. That kid was really, it was video games and it was Discord chat and it was staying up all night. And he became, he had serious mental health problems and physical health problems from that time of isolation. And that's
So
a 13-year-old. Yeah.
Even within one family, each kid experienced it so differently.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I saw that a lot, actually.
Wow. Okay. So how many families did you, I think you speak about 5, but were there more that you spoke to or?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I talked to as many different people with different experiences that I could, yeah.
So do you have a standout story that either haunts you or like it elevates you, whatever, just stands out?
When it comes to the teenagers, one that I interviewed actually in New Orleans, and she had moved out of her home before the pandemic, and so she was living with a friend. And when remote learning started, she was 16 years old, 15, 16 years old, and there was a house full of kids. There were like 14 people living in one house, and she was the person in charge of the children. The adults in the house were working. So she's getting like 5, 6 kids breakfast and getting them on their Zooms. And this is like an incredibly driven person, wants to be a pediatrician, like overcome a whole bunch of hard stuff in her life. And it was too much for her. She ended up getting hospitalized for anxiety in the summer of 2020. And which obviously people can relate to just as caregivers, right? Just like what that was like getting like 6 kids on their Zoom calls. I can't even imagine, right? But this is a teenager. And then the other part, though, is that, she was able to reconnect and rededicate herself to her goals. And when school started to come back in person, she had some ability to come back in the fall of 2021, spring of 2021, really. Then she was able to, she started an internship program. She was doing leadership at her school. This is an alternative school. And she was back on track for graduation. So she really turned things around from like a really tough situation.
So she had to be the adult. And
very much.
I didn't want to be the adult. Wow.
Yeah. And that was a home that she'd chosen as a refuge, right? From what was going on in her own origin home.
Wow. Yeah. And I don't know. I love stories. Is there one more you can think of that you want to share with us?
Well, let me think. I mean, I guess, another one that kind of I love to talk about is in California. So this was a family that reached out to me, and they had an 11-year-old who had autism and dyslexia and ADHD. And he'd gone over this very hard journey of 2 years of dealing with his IEP and learning and getting really in control of himself in the classroom. His math scores were way up. His language scores were up when everything shut down. And this was a kid that Zoom school was a total disaster because he's going to get on the computer and break every password and break every safety thing just so he can play video games and watch YouTube. That's what he wants to do with his time. And so somebody has to sit with him and give him, like they were giving him a piece of candy for every 15 minutes that he was on his Zoom school. And it's daily tantrums in this house. It's daily meltdowns. It's, just incredible amounts of patience. And then in the summer of 2020, after that school year was winding down, they get a call from this kid's best friend. And this kid's best friend is a new arrival from Southeast Asia. So they had been made friends in 4th grade. And they were offering support to this family. And with lockdown, that family came apart and it was no longer a safe place for this boy. And so without missing a beat, they took in this friend as an emergency foster kid. And they gave him a bed. They're sharing a bedroom. And I came and visited, they showed me their Legos. They showed me the cat that they like carry around from room to room. And they go, the thing they both love to do is razor scootering. And they're playing tricks on the razor scooter. So, just when you think you can't do one more thing, somebody asks you and you step up. It's like, it's so incredible to me.
Yeah, the humanity, right? Like it does make its way through all of the clouds. You can still see it. I think about the kids because that was one of your stories in the book.
Yeah.
And I think about the kids who were making progress and then lost all progress. Are you in touch with them now to see, are they able to get back? Like, is the loss forever? Are we going to be chasing that gain?
So in special education, there's the concept of compensatory services, right? And if kids didn't get what they needed, you try to give them extra, basically. And we see that school districts are trying to do this. We have a lot of districts that invested in summer learning programs, enrichment, tutoring, but first of all, it's not being tracked very well. We don't really know where it's being deployed and how many kids are doing it and why. And what
I don't know if I'm frozen or you're frozen.
Oh no. How about now? Now you're frozen.
I think my Wi-Fi went out, but I'm back. I think we're back.
Yes, I think we're back.
So, okay, so there's not much tracking going on. So reporting is going to be pretty tough to do on that.
Yeah, I mean, and the reporting on where kids are at, from what I've seen, there is some signs of academic recovery in elementary school students. And in some places there's bright spots. There's not as much for middle school students. So middle school students really, those are critical years for remaining engaged in school and staying on the path to college. So I think there's real reason for concern.
Okay, so let's flip to the other side. Were there any positive stories around teenagers that stuck with you?
I think there's positives to be found. Part of what I covered was obviously in the first pandemic year was the Black Lives Matter uprising in summer of 2020, and there was a lot of teen involvement in that. There were a lot of teens organizing marches, and it was really for a lot of them the first time that they were able to be out of their homes, right, and doing something together. So that was really important and positive in a lot of ways. And I think that we've kind of seen that continue. I think there's so much activation in this generation, whether it's around, March for Our Lives, gun safety, or, more recently over abortion access, and climate. So that's something that I see as a bright spot in this generation of teens.
Yeah, and hopefully, they're going to change the world anyway. So hopefully they take their good and keep doing more good.
Yeah.
In the beginning, people would talk about like silver linings, and nobody wanted to hear that phrase. Like it's just that is a question of timing when you use that. But I think we might have enough distance now to say, what are some of the silver linings that you hope will stick?
So it's a unique opportunity to kind of turn the volume down on the world and be at home with your family. And I think that for people who were able to think a little bit about what they really want for their lives and for their kids' lives, I'm hoping and I'm seeing a little bit thoughtfulness about, like, do we really need to rush back into having extracurriculars 5 days a week? Like, is college, is getting all the AP courses really the most important thing? Or is it more important that I spend time with my friends and that I get a little chance to do the things that I like to do? And so can we take our foot off the pedal a little bit in terms of what was a paradigm of like very high pressure child rearing that was kind of turned into an enforced absence? I think there's some chinks of light there, I think.
It's interesting. I wonder how long, like, you forget that was joyful, and you kind of, I feel this way right now in my own life, trying to figure out, do I really want to go to that? And it's hard the further away you get from the crisis to remember like the beauty of what happened in there.
Yeah, the FOMO is very real, and just like, but then you have to be real with the fact that like our social stamina is not what it was. Like, I don't understand how I used to get up and like give the kids breakfast and get on the subway and go work in the city and like put on pants every day. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I know.
And but I want my kids to have that. It's hard for them because they do have to go to school every day. And I want that normalcy for them, but it's also, I get that it's a lot.
Okay, we have Dr. Sunya Luther asking, how about the mental health toll on these kids' primary caregivers? And Sunya, put your link into the chat, because her work is all about who mothers the moms.
Yes.
And so, yeah, did you have any research on that?
Yes. And I want to say hi, because I've interviewed her in the past. They have a whole chapter on this, and a part of it was excerpted in The Atlantic, and it talks about how the brunt of this really fell on mothers, especially in heterosexual partnerships, and how the sense of betrayal. I actually, personally, I am surrounded by people who are in separation and divorce right now, because the level of just like, we white knuckled our way through a very stressful time. And now it's time for a reckoning. And people are like, I'm not doing this anymore, basically. And I don't know if that's going to be reflected in statistics, but just the question of, the fact that mothers in particular were left to twist in the wind, and people were just like, oh yeah, mom is stepping back from work, or she's still working the same job, because mothers didn't leave the workforce as quite as much en masse, but they had to cut back their hours. They had to go on a different track in order to pick up all this slack at home that other people weren't doing. I think that's going to linger, honestly.
So Jessica, can you put a link to some of Sunia's stuff that we've done with her? And then if you can find the link to her website, that would be great also. We want all the moms, actually any caregiver here, to check her out, because she's really doing amazing work. And the whole idea is that we need each other to figure out how not to hit those points where, we just have to say we got to change the whole life we're living right now. Okay, so shifting a little bit to parents who felt like they were teachers at home and were really kind of, maybe for the first time, understanding how much they valued what the teachers had to go through. Do you think there's a sense of greater appreciation for teachers right now?
No, because I just saw a PDK poll that said that the measurement, so parents' approval of their local public school is still quite high. It's actually growing. Which is a very robust finding. People are like, education is terrible, but my kid's school is great. However, the measurement, would I want my child to work at a public school? That's at an all-time low. And I think that the overall society-wide, the sense is that teachers have become a punching bag and they're being disrespected intensely. And part of that obviously is this activism that's going on around, race in the classroom, gender in the classroom. And a lot of that stems from, the story that goes that like, school was on Zoom and parents wandered in the room and they didn't like what they were hearing, that there was a sense of loss of control, or like violation of the sanctity of the classroom in a sense. So that's very real. I think the divisiveness and the basically like also the sense of resentment that we started off talking about. School closures went on so long. And I think some people blame teachers for that, and they have that feeling still.
Oh, well, I think I might not have asked that question if that were the answer. I was hoping that we were embracing, what the hardest job ever, to spend all day with our kids that we send off, is being a teacher. And then the other component of school is that I think I didn't appreciate beforehand was the village that was created in this world at school that protected my kids. Yeah. So if I wasn't seeing something at home, but I got a call from somebody, that was great, right? And we lost that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And kids missed out on things. They missed out on interventions and assessments that they should have had if they'd had like an adult, another trustworthy adult that had a good look at their kids. We do really rely on schools and doctors and other people to help us do that.
Okay, you put a link out there. Did you want to put it in the chat for everyone to see?
Yes, absolutely.
So put it in the comments, not the private chat.
I'm just not seeing the way to get into the comments. That's why
I
put it in the chat. Do you want to just copy and paste it? That's the poll that I just mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll get that in there either now or afterwards. Okay, I want to remind everybody. Can you hold up your cover one more time of the book? I just started it, and first of all, I love any book that covers family stories, but it's really good. I think everybody should be getting it. And if you want to be entered into our raffle, Jessica, if you could put the email in there once again. Okay, so, kids who are kind of entering high school right now, they missed such formative years, right? Like, and some would say, yay, because middle school can be so difficult. But really, so much of that is developmentally necessary. So by the time those kids start looking at college, and even the kids in high school right now, they miss something. So do you see a gap year as one step toward giving them more childhood?
That's a really interesting idea. I've been talking with just kind of like trying to gather some information from experts about how do we address these social gaps, right? Because we don't normally think about having to kind of like structure our children's social experiences in the same way once they get a little bit older. But they obviously need it. And I know because I recently had two friends who were, had 11-year-olds calling home saying they want to come home from summer camp because the other kids are being mean and like, just like escalating it to that level, knowing that like these kids need help interacting. And so I think that there's a lot of different ways to get at that. With the gap year, the only thing that would make me a little nervous would to say like, you definitely want to balance the goal setting, ability of kids. Like what is the goal of the gap year and what kinds of experiences are they going to have in the gap year? There's various types of like, there's a program I know that I love called Global Citizen Year where it's very structured and there's,
oh yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
And even just reading about it and how it's structured could get you thinking about, okay, like, what do I want? How do I want to design this? Do I want, mentorships? Do I want internships? Do I want to travel? Do I want to do service? Because to me, like, I wouldn't wholeheartedly endorse just like a kid taking time off because it's like time off from what we had a lot of time off.
Right. Right. I mean, I think when I say gap year, I feel like we're talking about something enriching.
Yeah.
That you do. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You don't have to sign up for something that's super expensive. But, if you look at your kid and you say they're not ready, then that's maybe a good alternative, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's totally fair. And I think especially if you're being honest about, the role of social, the need to have social experiences that maybe they don't want to be having in college because college is for learning. I think that, it's very clear and it's important to just involve your kid in that decision-making also.
Yeah. Okay. Lori, yay. We love when you comment. Lori says she loves your title. It's so true. It was a great title. I think there's a story behind the title, right?
Well, I think originally I was talking a lot about the lost year. And I discovered that the lost year was something that happened in Arkansas in Little Rock during segregation, where after the big confrontation of the Little Rock Nine and the Eisenhower calling in the Army, the National Guard, the response then was just to shut down the schools for a year, the high schools in Little Rock. And that was known as the lost year. And I started thinking a little bit more about, okay, are we talking about something that kids are missing, that they have a deficit, or are we talking about something that was taken away from them with no fault of their own? And that's kind of how I landed on the stolen year.
Yeah. Yeah. Really powerful. Okay. Last question for you. And of course, so hard to answer, but if you had a crystal ball, can you make from your research, can you extrapolate any predictions about what the long-term impact is going to be?
In terms of a generational defining event and how teenagers see and define their lives going forward, there is certainly a huge risk of loss of trust in institutions. And so whether that means that these teenagers go forth and they say, I want to build a different society with different rules and different sense of what we owe to each other, I think there's some reason to hope for that. But there's also reason for, to think about there being more division coming forward. So I think that's what I think about where we're headed as a country. And of course, if we don't invest in kids to get them back on track, we're going to have a less educated citizenry, which is going to have less resources. And that's going to be, terrible thing for the country. So we have to really, but I'm not going to write that in stone because I think we have to, it's what we do now that's going to determine that.
Yeah. And also it is their reality. And sometimes, there are kids who grow up poor that don't know they're poor because that's just their reality. Right.
Yeah.
So hopefully this just turns into a piece of their storytelling.
Absolutely. And everybody, this is something I talk to bereavement counselors, right? People that talk to kids who have been through absolutely the worst thing, the loss of a parent at a young age. And they really say, it's up to them to define what this means to them. And all the feelings are okay. You're just there to listen and witness.
Okay. I recommend the book. Everybody get a look at it. Anya Kamenetz, thanks so much for being here with us. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks for the great discussion and all of the comments. I appreciate it a lot.